The doors didn't slam. They opened. That was worse. I walked through the center of my father's pack assembly. The room he'd filled with every senior wolf who'd ever looked through me like I was furniture. And I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I carried a folder. 3 documents, 22 years of proof. Kane was on his feet before I reached the table. "You don't belong in this room." I set the folder down. Flat. Final. Neither did the lie. I pulled the first page free and laid it facing outward. A birth record, 3 names. The third, mine, crossed out in a single administrative line. And beneath it, in handwriting I had spent my entire life watching sign off on orders I was expected to obey without question. Remove from record. The pack lawyer went pale. Dax went very still. I looked up at the man who buried me before I could speak. And I said the only sentence that had ever mattered. "I'm your daughter. Dead." 3 hours earlier, I was carrying a tray of champagne flutes across the main hall and calculating the exact geometry of how not to be seen. It wasn't instinct anymore. It was architecture. I knew where to walk. The eastern corridor, not the center. Because the center put you in the sight line of the fireplace where the senior wolves clustered before events. I knew how to carry weight. Shoulders slightly forward, gaze tracking the floor 2 meters ahead, the posture of someone who is a function, not a person. I knew how to time my breathing in rooms where Kane was present. That last one I had learned at 14. He was across the hall now, 30 feet away, a drink already in his hand at 4 in the afternoon, talking to 3 senior pack members whose names I knew and who did not know mine. I kept moving. I was 3 steps from the serving table when he laughed. The sound cut clean across the room, easy, relaxed, the laugh of someone who had never once in his life had to calculate the geometry of anything. And then he said my name, not to me, about me. "Zara, she nearly dropped the whole thing last month. You should have seen it." Laughter, warm, inclusive. The room finding the shape of the joke without needing to know the details. I did not stop walking. I did not adjust my grip on the tray. I set each glass down in its designated position, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I kept my face exactly where I had trained it to stay for the last 8 years. Neutral, present, nowhere. Someone near Kane added something. More laughter. The joke extended itself the way casual cruelty always extends itself when a room gives it permission. Easily, with no particular malice, which was always the worst version. Not hatred. Furniture. I became aware of the silence from the east wall before I understood what it was. 2 men, not laughing. I clocked them the way I clocked every unfamiliar presence in any room I worked. Quick, functional, threat first. Outside wolves. I could tell by the way they stood. Oriented to the space rather than within it. The particular stillness of people who had not yet mapped the room's social topography and were watching it instead of performing inside it. The first one, warm build, open jaw, light eyes, was looking at Kane. Not with hostility. With something quieter and more final than hostility. The flat, closed expression of a man who had just taken a measurement and found the subject wanting and was already done. The second one was looking at me. I looked away, reflex, fast. The practiced drop of someone for whom direct eye contact from a stranger in a room like this had historically been the opening move of something worse than being ignored. But I felt it. The way you feel a specific kind of attention that is not the attention you have been trained to expect. Not assessment, not dismissal, not the casual flicker of someone noting you exist before looking through you. He was reading something. I did not know what. I moved to the next table. The gathering ended. I restacked, cleared, reset. I was in the kitchen corridor by 7 the next morning. Not the front corridor, the service one. The back route that ran parallel to the guest wing. When I heard footsteps behind me that did not belong to any of the staff, the cadence was wrong. Too unhurried, hey. I turned, the warm one, light eyes. Standing in the service corridor like it was the most natural thing in the world. Hands in his pockets, no performance in any line of his body. I said nothing. "I'm Ace," he said. I waited. "I was at the gathering last night," he said. I wanted to say, "What happened across the room?" The thing, Kane said. A beat. That wasn't all right. And I know you know that, but I wanted someone to actually say it out loud, so. The angle, I thought immediately. What is the angle? There is always an angle. He watched me do the math. He did not rush me through it. I'm Zara, I said finally. I know. He said it simply, like names were facts rather than weapons. I should get back to. Yeah. He stepped back, giving me the corridor. I know. I just wanted you to know someone saw it. He turned and walked back toward the guest wing. No ask, no trade, just said it and left. I stood in the service corridor for 11 seconds. Before I made myself move, I counted, because that was the other thing I had learned. When something did not fit the pattern you had mapped, you gave yourself exactly enough time to register it, and then you moved. Because lingering in confusion was a luxury I had never been able to afford. But 11 seconds, that was more than I had given anything in years. The second one, Voss, did not speak to me. He watched. I became aware of this the way you become aware of weather. Not one event, but a pattern, accumulating across days until you could not explain how you had failed to name it sooner. Day 1. Estate library, morning inventory. He was on the far side of the room when I entered, standing with a book he was not reading, and when I looked up, he was not looking at the shelves. He was looking at the wall beside Dax's portrait. Not at me, at the portrait, with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. Day 2, outer corridor, afternoon. He passed through the space where I was working without acknowledgement. Guests rarely acknowledged. But he slowed, fractionally, at the point where my path and his briefly intersected, and I felt the weight of attention like a shift in air pressure. Day 3. The estate's main hall during Dax's afternoon meeting. I was resetting the room. Dax was at the far end with 4 senior wolves. Voss was standing near the window. He wasn't watching Dax. He was watching the space between Dax and me, the gap. The deliberate, perfectly maintained, 22 years of practiced gap. I had always known that gap was there. I had never once thought to ask what it meant. Day 4. Library. Late. I was alone with the inventory ledger when Reed walked in. He stopped when he saw me. Most people's faces go through dismissal fast enough that you almost miss it. The flicker of recalibration. The moment where they remember the category you occupy and adjust their expression accordingly. Reed's face did not do that. He looked at me, and for a moment, unguarded, unmanaged, something crossed his face that I did not have a category for. He was going to say something. I could see it forming. He opened his mouth. I've been. Kane appeared in the doorway, Reed's face shut. The something vanished. He picked up the thing he'd come for and walked past me without completing the word. And Kane watched him go. And then Kane looked at me with the flat, assessing look of someone who has just remarked a boundary he thought was already clear. He said nothing. He left. The library settled around me. Quiet. The way rooms go quiet when something just failed to happen. I stood there, holding the ledger, and I thought about all the almost moments I had catalogued over 22 years. The not quites, the opened and closed faces, the sentences that began and did not finish. And for the first time, standing in that room, I felt the shape of all of them at once. Not random. A pattern, something maintained, something managed. Night 4. I was passing the east guest corridor when I heard Ace's voice through the closed door. Low. Then, Voss, lower. I did not stop. I had been trained too well for that. But I caught 6 words through the door because the corridor was quiet and the door was not perfectly sealed. Voss's voice. Precise. Certain. Something is wrong about Zara. I kept walking. My face, nothing. My hands, steady. But inside, in the part of me that had been running the same calculation for 8 years without a result, something shifted. Not fear. Not hope. Something older than both. Recognition. I kept walking for exactly 43 steps after I heard it. I counted those too. Something is wrong about Zara. Not she is sad. Not she has been treated badly. Wrong like a secret. Wrong like someone made sure something couldn't be found. I had been living in this house for 22 years and I had never once heard anyone use that word about me. Wrong, and mean the structure rather than the person. I went to my room. I lay down on the narrow bed with my arms at my sides and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about the gap, The deliberate, perfectly maintained gap between Dax and me in every room we had ever occupied simultaneously. I had always read it as contempt. What if it was something else? What if contempt required too much acknowledgement of the thing it was contemptuous of? What if what Dax had been maintaining for 22 years, with the precision of a man who was very good at managing things, was not contempt at all? What if it was erasure? I was up before the house. That was normal. I was always up before the house. What was not normal was that I spent the first hour of the morning in the administrative corridor on the estate's north side. The wing where Dax kept his files, his sealed records, the paper architecture of 22 years of running a pack and a family and a very specific public story. And I stood outside the locked office door, and I thought very carefully about what I was willing to do and what I was not. I was not ready, not yet. I needed to know if I was imagining it first. I needed someone with no stake in the lie to look at the same evidence I had been walking through my whole life and tell me whether it added up to what I thought it was adding up to. The problem was I did not have someone like that, or I hadn't, until 6 days ago. I found Voss in the east corridor at noon, not by accident. I had tracked his pattern across 4 days. The specific routes he took through the estate, the hours he moved, the places he paused. And I had positioned myself at the intersection where I knew he would pass. And when I heard his footsteps, I turned and I looked directly at him, and I did not look away first. He stopped. He looked at me with the expression I still did not have a category for. Not pity, not assessment, not the reflexive, social recalibration most people perform when they realized they were being addressed by someone from the service staff. Something else, something older and more careful. "You've been watching me," I said. Yes, no qualifier, no apology. Just the word, delivered with the flatness of someone who did not see the point of denying facts. Why, he considered this. Not the way people consider questions when they're buying time, but the way people consider questions when they want to give the precise, accurate answer rather than the easy one. "Because something about this house doesn't add up," he said. "And you are where the discrepancy is loudest." The corridor was very still around us. Marble floor, high ceiling, the sound of the estate continuing its morning 3 rooms away, indifferent. "What discrepancy?" I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and this was when I understood, for the first time, the shape of what Voss was. Not cold, not indifferent, not the analytical sense of feeling that I had initially filed him as. He was precise, because feeling things imprecisely was not something he was willing to do. Every calculation he was running, and he was always running calculations, was in service of something underneath that he was not ready to name in a corridor at noon. "I don't have everything yet," he said. "But you have something." Yes, I waited. "Not yet," he said. "When I tell you, I need you to be ready." I felt something move through my chest that was not quite anger and not quite fear. "You're asking me to wait," I said. "In this house, while I'm asking you to wait 3 more days." His voice was even, precise. The voice of someone who has done the risk calculation and is presenting the result rather than the working. "If I tell you now, and I'm wrong about one piece of it, you lose everything. If I wait until it's complete and I'm right, which I am, you walk into that room with something he cannot argue against." "Which room?" I said. Something moved across his face. "The one you've always had a right to walk into," he said. "Through the front doors." Silence. The corridor held it between us. I looked at him, this man who had arrived at this estate 6 days ago and had been dismantling something in the dark ever since, quietly, without asking me whether I wanted it dismantled. And I thought about what it meant that the first person to look at the gap and call it by its correct name was someone who owed me absolutely nothing. 3 days, I said. 3 days. I turned to leave Zara. I stopped. "What I found." He paused, and this was the first time I'd seen him pause in the middle of a sentence. The first sign of something beneath the precision that was too large for the precision to fully contain. It changes everything, every single thing you think you know about this house. He looked at me with that expression, the one I could not name. The one that was not pity and not strategy and not the performance of care that I had learned to identify and preemptively step away from, held carefully, both hands. Then he turned and walked away, and I stood in the corridor, and I did not count this time because my counting had stopped working. And the thing I felt in my chest was not recognition anymore. It was something more dangerous than that. That night, across the estate, Ace and Voss were talking. I did not know this then. I know it now. Ace sat on the edge of the bed, and Voss stood at the window, and between them, on the small table, were 3 documents, printed, annotated, cross-referenced. And Ace read the first page and went very quiet in the way that was not calm. "How long?" Ace said. 22 years. The room held that. "She's been living as a servant," Ace said, "in her father's house." "Yes, her father's house." His voice was flat, not with indifference, with the specific, contained quality of someone managing something that wanted very much to be rage and was being held, barely, on the correct side of it. "Kane has known she exists and treated her as staff his entire life," Voss said. "Yes." A long silence. "We need to tell her," Ace said. "Not yet." Voss, "If we tell her now and Dax moves the records before we have the midwife's statement, she is a woman making a claim against an alpha with no corroborating documentation and 2 outside wolves as her only witnesses." Voss turned from the window. "He will remove her from the territory within the week." Ace was quiet. He knew his brother was right. He hated that his brother was right. "The midwife," he said. "I contact her tomorrow. And if she won't talk," Voss looked at his brother. "She'll talk," he said. "She's been carrying this for 22 years. People who have been carrying something that long are not waiting to be convinced. They're waiting for someone to ask the right question." Ace looked down at the documents. At the 3rd name, crossed out, 1 administrative line, and beneath it, in handwriting he would not forget for the rest of his life, "Remove from record." "She nearly walked away from me in the corridor," Ace said quietly, "when I spoke to her. She gave me about 20 seconds before she found a reason to leave." "She doesn't trust warmth," Voss said. "She's been taught that warmth is a transaction. I know. A beat. I'm going to keep showing up anyway." Voss turned back to the window. He did not say what he was thinking. He had been falling since the first gathering. Not with Ace's warmth, not with Ace's directness, but with the specific, total, irrevocable quality of a man who has seen something rare and understood it completely and cannot unfeel the understanding. And he had said nothing because what he felt was already implicated in something much larger than he was, and speaking before the truth was established would be a form of deception he could not accept. He was precise about everything. He was most precise about this. Tomorrow he would call the midwife. In 3 days he would tell Zara the truth. And somewhere on the other side of the estate, in a narrow bed with her arms at her sides, Zara was staring at the ceiling, still counting, still calculating, still waiting for the angle that wasn't coming. Day 6. I was crossing the north corridor with a stack of linen for the east guest rooms when Kane stepped out of the side passage and blocked my path. Not an accident. He had been waiting there, I knew, because his arms were crossed and his weight was settled, and there was nothing in the passage behind him that would have required him to be standing precisely in that spot at precisely that moment. "You've been talking to them," he said. "The guests." I said, "Don't." His voice was low, not a shout. Kane had learned years ago that volume was for people who had no other tools. "You've been talking to the Voss twins," he said. "I've seen you." I shifted the linen in my arms, said nothing. "They leave in 4 days. He took 1 step toward me, not threatening, not quite, calibrated exactly to the edge of the line where I could not call it anything without sounding unreasonable. "Whatever you think you're doing, stop." I met his eyes. I had spent my whole life not meeting his eyes. "I'll let you get back to work," I said, and I walked past him. 14 steps to the corridor's end. I counted everyone. Behind me, Kane stood very still, and I could feel the weight of his recalculation. the specific, threat-sensing reorientation of a man who had just received a response he did not expect from a direction he had stopped monitoring years ago. I did not look back. Day 6, late. I was passing the administrative corridor, Dax's corridor, when Voss appeared from the far end. He was walking toward me. He had a specific quality to his movement that I had not seen before. Tighter. Still controlled. But the control was working harder than usual. He stopped when he reached me. He looked at my face for a moment, the way he had been looking at my face since the beginning. Reading, cataloging, deciding. And then something settled in his expression. A decision made. Tomorrow, he said. Not 3 days. Tomorrow. My chest went still. What changed? Kane saw us in the corridor. A beat. He's going to Dax. The corridor held that between us. How much do you have? I said. Enough. His voice was even. The midwife confirmed everything this morning. Everything. Voss. There's a birth record, he said, with 3 names on it. 3. The third name. He looked at me. And in the space between that sentence and its ending, in the half-second before he said the next word, I already knew. I had always known. The gap, the crossed-out line, the almost moments and the not-quites, and every room I had ever entered through the wrong door. Remove from record. I had been removed from a record I didn't know existed. Tell me, I said. And he opened his mouth, and the door at the end of the corridor opened. Dax, standing in the frame of his own administrative office, looking at the two of us, looking at me, for the first time in 22 years, really looking. Dax looked at me the way you look at something you buried. Not with guilt, with the precise, cold recalibration of a man assessing whether the thing he buried has climbed far enough out of the ground to be a problem. 3 seconds. That was how long he stood in the doorway. 3 seconds of looking at me. Really looking. The way he had spent 22 years training himself not to. And in those 3 seconds, I understood something that no document had told me. And no midwife could have confirmed. He had always known exactly what I was. He had never once forgotten. The forgetting was the performance. The not looking was the work. Zara. His voice was the same voice he used to run pack assemblies. Controlled, authoritative, the voice of a man whose register had never once cracked in public. You're in the administrative corridor. I'm delivering linen to the East Wing, I said. The East Wing is behind you. A beat. I took a wrong turn, I said. He looked at Voss. Voss looked back at him with the flat, unhurried expression of a man who had been expecting this specific confrontation and had already decided how he intended to conduct himself through it. Nothing moved in Voss's face, nothing conceded. Mr. Voss, Dax said, I believe the evening meal is being served in the West dining room. Thank you, Voss said. He did not move. Dax's jaw tightened by 1 degree. 1. I had spent 22 years learning to read that jaw. I'll find my own way, Voss said pleasantly, and turned and walked back down the corridor the way he had come, away from me, away from Dax, unhurried, taking his time. And as he passed me, close enough that his arm nearly brushed mine, he turned his head by exactly the degree required to meet my eyes. 2 words, not spoken. Tomorrow morning. Dax watched him go. Then he looked at me, and I looked back at him. For the first time in my life, I did not look away first. I don't know if he felt it. The shift, the thing that had changed in the last 6 minutes in this corridor, the ground that had moved beneath the architecture of 22 years of careful management. But his eyes moved over my face with the focused attention of a man running a new calculation, and then he stepped back into his office and closed the door. I stood in the corridor with the linen in my arms. My face, nothing. My hands, perfectly still. Inside, everything. He was waiting at the table when I arrived, not the estate. A coffee shop 2 streets from the estate's east gate. Neutral ground. Public enough that nothing could be managed or contained here. The city conducting its ordinary morning, entirely indifferent to what was about to happen at this particular table. Voss had chosen it, of course he had. He had a folder in front of him, closed. He did not open it when I sat down. He looked at me first. That same reading, look, the one I had stopped trying to decode and had started simply allowing, and then he said, "How are you?" I looked at him. "Tell me," I said. He opened the folder. The birth record was on top. 3 columns, 3 names. I had a brother named Cain. I had a brother named Reed. And I had a name, my actual recorded name. The one that had existed for exactly 4 days before it was removed. Written in the 3rd column, in the administrative font of a hospital birth record. Clean and formal and completely real. Beneath it, 1 line, handwritten, remove from record. I had seen Dax's handwriting on estate documents my entire life. I knew it the way I knew the layout of every room in that house, completely, involuntarily, 'cause knowledge was the only form of safety I had ever had access to. I looked at his handwriting on my birth record for a long time. The date, I said, on the removal notation. 4 days after the birth, Voss said. 4 days. I had existed on paper for 4 days. The midwife, I said. He turned to the 2nd document, a written statement, signed. The midwife's name at the bottom. Elderly, retired. 2 streets from the hospital where I was born, and above it, 3 paragraphs of clean, precise, devastating recollection. The birth, the 3 children, the alpha who arrived on day 4 with a request she had not felt able to refuse and had not forgiven herself for accepting. She'll testify, I said. She asked if she could. I sat with that. A woman I had never met had been carrying the weight of my erasure for 22 years and had been waiting, not for someone to convince her, but for someone to ask the right question. I looked at the folder, the documents inside it. 22 years of a lie, 6 pages. How long have you known? I said. 6 days. I looked at him. You waited 6 days. Yes. While I was in that house. Yes. His voice did not flinch. Because if I had told you on day 1 and Dax moved the records before I had the midwife's statement, you would have had a claim and no corroboration, and he would have had you removed from the territory within the week. A pause. I needed it to be something he couldn't argue against. I needed it to be airtight before it was yours. The cafe moved around us. Ordinary morning. Coffee ordered. Buses outside. I know what 6 days in that house costs, he said. I am sorry for every one of them. Something moved through my chest. Not warmth. I did not have a clean category for warmth yet. Not in the direction of Voss. Not with the folder open between us and the world still reorganizing itself around the information it contained. But something, the specific foreign sensation of being accounted for by someone who did not have to. Tell me everything, I said, from the beginning, every piece of it. He told me everything. I went to Reed first, not Dax Reed, because Reed was the crack. I had known it for years without knowing what it meant, and because the first thing you do when you have 6 pages of irrefutable truth is not walk into the room with the most power. You walk into the room with the door that is already slightly open. I found him in the library. He looked up when I entered, and before I could say anything, before I could place the folder on the reading table or form the first word of what I had prepared, his face did something. That thing. The softening. The unguarded almost. Zara. I put the folder on the table. I did not say a word. I stepped back and let him read. He read the birth record first, then the removal notation, then the midwife's statement. I watched his face move through it. No denial. No reaching for Dax's language. No performance of disbelief. No recalibration toward the version of events that protected the family structure he had been living inside his entire life. Just reading and understanding, and the retroactive arithmetic of 22 years of a person who had been standing in front of him the whole time. The library was very quiet. I almost said something, he said, in this room. 6 days ago. I know. He looked up at me. I almost said something in the kitchen corridor 2 years ago, he said, and on the East grounds the summer before that, and he stopped. I know, I said again, not absolution, a fact. He sat with it, the weight of every almost moment accumulated, given its full retroactive meaning. What do you need from me? He said. That was the moment, not the documents, not the midwife, not the 6 pages of proof. The moment was Reed asking what I needed, in a voice that had stripped itself of everything except the question. Everything you know about his vulnerabilities, I said. Every weakness in the public record, everything you have access to that I don't. He nodded. When do you need it? Now, I said, We start now. We had 3 days. Then we had 2. Then Kane found out about Reed. I don't know exactly when it happened. I know the shape of it, the way the estate's social temperature shifted in the span of an afternoon. The way Kane moved differently, through the house, tighter, faster, the movement of a man who had located the source of a threat and was calculating his response. Ace found me in the kitchen corridor at 6 in the evening. Kane went to Dax an hour ago, he said. I don't know what he told him, but Dax has locked the administrative wing. My stomach did not drop, it steadied. He's moving the records, I said. Probably. How long do we have? If he's filing suppression orders tonight, maybe 36 hours before he can get it in front of the PAC lawyer. I thought about the 6 pages in the folder Voss had given me, already copied, already distributed to 3 locations outside the estate, already in the midwife's hands as corroborating documentation. Already. Because Voss had thought of this 6 days ago, because Voss thought of everything, because the thing Voss had been doing quietly, and without announcement since the moment he found the first document, was building something Dax could not reach. Done. He can lock whatever he wants, I said. Ace looked at me. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not relief, but the warm, specific recognition of a man watching someone he believes in do exactly what he believed they would do. He reached out. His hand found mine. Not claiming, not performing, just present. The way he was always present. Warm, steady, available without cost. I let him hold my hand for 4 seconds. Then I said, I need to call the PAC assembly. He let go. When? Tomorrow, I said. We move tomorrow, before he can regroup. I called the assembly that night. Formal invocation. PAC constitutional right. The PAC secretary, an older woman named Maris, who had worked the administrative desk for 15 years and had, I now understood, been watching the gap between Dax and me for almost as long, received the invocation. Her voice on the phone was very careful. This will require the Alpha's response within 24 hours, she said. I know the law, I said. A pause. The invocation is valid, she said. I'll send the formal notification. I said thank you. I hung up. The estate was quiet around me. Dark. The city beyond the windows doing its ordinary late-night thing. Indifferent to the specific irrevocable thing that had just been set in motion inside one room of one building on its edge. I sat for a long time, not processing. I had processed. I had been processing for 22 years without knowing what I was processing. What I was doing now was something different. I was deciding what face to wear into that room tomorrow. Not the face I had worn for 22 years. Not the face of someone who was invisible by choice and by practice and by the daily grinding work of making themselves small enough to survive. My face. The one with the scar at the corner of the lip that no one had ever asked about. The one with the jaw I had inherited from a man who had spent 2 decades pretending I did not exist. I was going to walk into that room with my father's bone structure and my own name and 6 pages of truth. And I was going to make him look. For the first time in 22 years, he was going to look. I was dressed before 5. Voss was in the corridor when I came out of my room. Not waiting, simply there, the way he was always simply there, 1 step ahead of where you needed him and making no noise about it. He looked at my face, at my jacket, at the folder under my arm. He did not say, "Are you ready? The midwife's statement is on top," he said. I know. Raid will be in position by the east wall. I know. A pause. He looked at me for a long moment with that expression. The one I had finally, in the last 2 days, begun to understand the shape of. Not pity, not strategy, not the warm directness of Ace, which was its own thing, which I had begun to let myself move toward, in the careful, tentative way, of someone who'd been taught that moving toward things got you hurt. Something else, quicker, more certain. The look of a man who found something rare and has been holding it carefully, with both hands, and is not in any hurry because he already knows how this ends, and he is willing to wait for exactly as long as it takes. Voss, I said. Yes, after. A beat. After, he said. I turned toward the main hall, toward the doors, the ones I had never walked through. I walked through them. The room went quiet from the edges inward. That was how I knew it was working. Not the center. The center was where Dax stood, where Cain stood, where the pack senior wolves had arranged themselves around the architecture of his authority, like furniture around a fireplace. The edges went quiet first. The people who had known me as the woman who carried the trays. The people who had laughed, or not laughed, or looked through me, or looked away. All of going quiet in stages as I walked through the main doors, and did not stop, did not adjust my trajectory, did not perform the particular deference that 22 years of this house had built into the muscles of my shoulders. I walked to the central table. I set the folder down, and I looked at my father. He was already still. That stillness, the specific, terrible stillness of a man who has been dreading a sound for 22 years and has just heard it, told me everything I needed to know about whether the documents in the folder were going to surprise him. They were not going to surprise him. Nothing about me had ever surprised him. He had simply been betting every day for 22 years that I would never find the language to make myself legible to the room. Today I had the language, 6 pages of it. You don't have standing. His voice was the assembly voice, controlled, final. The voice of a man who had used authority as a first language for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to speak without it. Whatever you think you're doing. I opened the folder. I placed the birth record on the table, facing outward, facing the room. The pack lawyer, a thin man named Greer, who had sat at Dax's right side for 11 years, looked at the document. His face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Recognition, calculation, something that was not quite fear but occupied the same neighborhood. He said, nothing. The pack constitutional right of blood claim. Any wolf with a documented claim to the alpha line may stand before the assembly and state that claim publicly. The alpha cannot refuse to hear it without forfeiting the pack's obligation of loyalty to his authority. A pause. I have documentation. I have a corroborating witness statement. I have standing. Dax looked at Greer. Greer looked at the document. Greer did not look back at Dax. That was the first crack. She's a servant, Cain said. He was on his feet. He had been on his feet since I walked through the door. I had clocked it in my peripheral vision, the way his weight came forward, the way his jaw set, and now he was moving, placing himself between me and the table, the way he had always placed himself between things he wanted to contain and the rooms he wanted to contain them in. She found documents somewhere and altered them, he said, addressing the room, not me. Whatever she told these guests. The birth record carries the hospital's administrative seal, Voss said. From the east wall, quiet, precise, every head in the room turned. The removal notation is in the Alpha's own handwriting, Voss continued. I have a handwriting comparison prepared, if the assembly requires it. A beat. I also have a written statement from the attending midwife, witnessed and notarized, confirming the birth of 3 children, 2 male, 1 female, and the Alpha's request, 4 days later, to remove the female child from the record. The room held that. Cain looked at Voss. Voss looked back at him with the flat, unhurried expression of a man who has already won and is simply waiting for the other party to understand the score. Then Reed walked across the room, not from the east wall, from where he had been standing, near his father, near Cain, in the position he had occupied his entire life. He crossed the floor and came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Cain's face did something I had never seen it do. It lost its certainty, not its aggression. The aggression was still there, banked hot beneath the surface. But the certainty, the bedrock assumption that the room would arrange itself the way it always arranged itself, that the structure would hold because it had always held. That left his face, and what was underneath it was younger than I expected. Dax tried twice more. Authority. His voice, the assembly voice, informing the room that this claim had no merit and that he would be addressing it through the proper pack channels. The room looked at the documents. The room looked at Reed. Character. She had motives. She had outside help. She had orchestrated this. I placed the midwife's statement on the table. Her name is listed in the hospital's own records as the attending midwife, I said. She is 81 years old. She has no connection to any party in this room, except the one established in that statement. She is willing to appear before the assembly in person if required. Dax's voice, on the third attempt, lost something. Not volume. Something underneath volume. The register dropped. Fractionally, a degree, the width of a hairline fracture in material that had been under load for a very long time. And the room heard it. I saw it move through the senior wolves nearest him, the slight shift, the recalibration, the quiet, collective arithmetic of people who had been governed by a specific story for 22 years, and were now running the numbers on what it meant that the story had a foundational error. Then prove it. Kane, his voice stripped of the performance. No ease, no casual dominance, just the raw demand of a man whose last available argument was the one that had never failed him. He looked at me across the central table. You want to claim alpha blood, he said. Claim it. Pack challenge tradition. If you're what you say you are, prove it in the room. The assembly went still. Every eye on me. I looked at him. I looked at the face that shared my jaw, my brow, my father's bone structure. The face that had spent 22 years using our shared architecture to perform dominance over me, without either of us having the language for what we were actually doing to each other. Fine, I said. He did not expect that. The half-second of recalibration on his face. The moment where he had expected refusal or deflection or the particular shrinking he associated with me, cost him the first half-second of the fight. I did not shift. This was the choice. The one I had made the night before, sitting in the quiet of the estate's east wing with my jacket on and the folder in my lap. And I was not going to unmake it now. I was not going to win this by becoming something else. He was bigger, trained. He had been winning physical confrontations since he was 14 years old and had never once had to account for losing. What he had never had to do was fight someone who had spent 22 years developing the competency of a person for whom losing meant something real. I was faster. I knew how to take a hit and use the momentum. I knew how to read the tell in a shoulder before the arm moved. I knew how to wait. And that knowledge, the patience of it, the willingness to absorb and redirect rather than overpower, was the thing he had no defense against, because he had never once in his life needed patience. He came at me hard 3 times. The third time I redirected his momentum with his own weight, and he went down on the marble floor, and the sound of it, the flat, definitive sound of a large man going still, moved through the assembly room and did not echo. It just ended. Silence. The room looking at Kane on the floor, the room looking at me standing over him, the room looking at my father. Dax did not move to help his son. That was the last thing the room needed to see. He stood at the head of the assembly, and he watched Kane get to his feet, slowly, without assistance, and something in Dax's face completed its collapse. Not into grief, into the specific, airless expression of a man watching the structure he built fail the load test in public. Greer produced a form. I recognized the form. I had read the pack constitutional documents twice in the last 48 hours in the estate library, with Reed reading over my shoulder and confirming the procedural steps. The removal of authority form. 3 senior pack members signed it, then 2 more, then the 6th and the 7th, and the room, conducting the quiet, procedural transfer of power with the specific, unhurried efficiency of a community that had made a decision and was implementing it through the correct channels. Dax looked at the form. He looked at the room. And then, because he was Dax, because even now the control did not fully break, because the management of surface was the thing he had never once stopped doing, he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and he walked to the door, and he left. No speech, no final argument, just footsteps, and then the door, and then the room without him. Kane was standing alone, the room reorganizing around him, his father gone. Reed across the room beside me. He looked at the 3 of us, Reed and Ace, who had materialized at my left side with the warm, unhurried presence that was simply what Ace was, and Voss 1 step behind. watching the room the way he always watched rooms. And something moved through Kane's face that I had no category for. Not defeat, not resolution. The beginning of something that could go either way, toward reckoning or toward retreat. And I did not know which direction he would choose, and neither did he, and the room did not resolve it for him. I left him in the frame. That was the correct thing. Not victory's ending, not a villain's fall. Just a man standing in the changed room, with the changed weight of it, and the unresolved question of what kind of person he intended to be in the version of the world that now existed. Reed said very quietly beside me, "I know it doesn't. Don't," I said, a beat. "Just stay there." He stayed. Ace's hand found mine, brief, warm. The warmth I had spent 6 weeks looking for the angle on and had finally, in the last 48 hours, begun to accept might simply be what it was. I let him hold it. I looked back. Voss was one step behind. He was watching me, not the room, not Dax's empty chair, not Kane standing alone in the reorganizing space. Me, the way he had always watched me. The look that was not pity and not strategy. The look of a man who found something and has been holding it carefully and is in no hurry because he already knows. With the quiet certainty that was simply his nature. That time is now on their side. He met my eyes, held them. And what passed between us in that held look was not a beginning and not a declaration. It was a fact stated between two people who had been moving toward it since a formal gathering 7 days ago when he stood at the east wall and looked directly at my face and saw the discrepancy first and then kept looking. I turned back to the room, my pack. My name finally on the right record. I was 22 years old. I was standing in the house that buried me, and I was standing in it correctly. I'm going to step outside the story for a second, because I need to say this directly. I spent 22 years in that house being nothing. Not invisible, nothing. Like I had already been erased, before anyone had to do the work of erasing me. And the thing I need you to hear is that the hardest moment wasn't standing at that table with the documents. The hardest moment was the first time Ace sat down next to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because I almost walked away from that. Every single time. Because I had been taught, every day, in every room of that house, that care was a transaction I hadn't learned the rules to yet. It took me longer than it should have to understand that some things are just real. If you've ever been the one that got counted out, if you've ever been the one someone decided wasn't worth putting on the record, this one was for you. Tell me in the comments. When Voss said not yet, but soon, what did you think he'd found? And if you want to know what comes next, what happens to Kane, what happens to Dax in the city, and what happens the night Voss finally says the thing he has been not saying since the first gathering, hit subscribe. I'll be here.